Okay, it's recording. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. Her name is Minnie Alford, and she published a book back in March 29th of last year, 2018, about a serial killer who operated in eastern Washington, Spokane, primarily. His name was Robert Yates, and the title of her book is Robert Yates, From Darkness to Light. And she wrote a very detailed book about his life and experience, and also from a Christian perspective about how he found some type of salvation or redemption in jail. And she's also been in communication with other very disturbing people who are in jails throughout the United States, and we can talk more in detail about that. Minnie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Thanks for agreeing to the interview. I appreciate it. So the book, so it was a very detailed book. How did you become interested in the subject of Robert Yates and his serial killer past?
Well, Robert was kind of intriguing to me because actually his grandmother lives just a few towns down, or lived from my hometown where I'm at here in Tennessee. And what got me onto Robert was his grandmother murdered his grandfather back in 1945. I guess most people would say out of the blue. They said from the family's perspective there had never been any inclinations or abuse, and she woke up one morning and chopped up Robert's grandfather with an axe. And that was what brought me into Robert, was reading about the murders this close to where I'm at in my state. And I reached out to Robert, and he was very open, and he and I began to talk, and we kind of garnered, I guess what you'd say, professional relationship. If I was willing to tell his stories, his words, he was willing to hand me over all of his handwritten journals and diaries. So the book is based completely from his handwritten information, which I found forthcoming as much as I guess you can with a serial killer.
And when did that communication or contact begin?
Robert and I started talking, actually it'll be 4 years ago this month, and we just found each other to be, I told him what I was writing, and he told me about his experience and with being in the military, and he had received all these medals and different things, but then how he became to just kind of grow to a darker side of humanity, and how one thing led to another. And I asked him, I said, do you think there's any heredity, involved with you becoming a serial killer and your grandmother being a killer? And he said he didn't think so, but that kind of piqued my interest and was my initial reach out to Robert initially. So
Gotcha. And it is a very detailed book. It's very well written, but you kind of move back and forth. You're welcome. Between his life, a very detailed accounting of his upbringing and life, and then his in-court travails. He was tried in Spokane, but also for 2 other murders that happened in 1975, I believe, in Walla Walla, yes, Washington. And so he was transferred and given the death penalty in Walla Walla. But maybe what we can do is talk about how his early life experiences influenced him to become a serial killer.
Right. In his first admitted killings back in 1975 with the young couple, he was just out in the woods, from what he told me, hunting one day, and came upon them, and he just literally decided to shoot them. And he shot them both execution style, tried to cover them up with some brush, and that went unsolved for quite some time. And the young man was the only known man Robert killed. All of his other victims were women. And I asked him, do you have what was that drive or what hit you at that moment? And he said he just wasn't sure. It was like a darkness almost came over him. And at that moment, he decided to kill them. And I said, to me, that's almost like, I said, is that a feeling of arrogance or entitlement? And he said it was just a sense of evil, that he felt he had that right at that moment to take them out of this life. And I thought that was very telling.
Interesting. And that he was kind of an outdoors man. He had worked as a correctional officer inside a jail. He said that had really influenced him, and he was an insight into a very dark, evil kind of environment, right?
It did. He's actually serving. He was initially on death row, but at the end of last year, they commuted all the sentences to life without the possibility of parole. But he's actually serving his sentence in the prison he was a correctional officer in back in 1975 before he joined the Army in 77.
Remarkable. The worm turns. I guess that's an interesting kind of circular event. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, he did admit, or he did sign a plea agreement that he did commit 16 murders. But do you think that there might have been more than that?
Oh, absolutely. I really believe when he was in the service in Germany that I think he killed some that were never linked to him. I also have wondered when he served in Haiti and Somalia as well during the peacekeeping missions. I've wondered if he hadn't killed. And then, of course, I truly believe here in the States there were more he was never actually completely linked to. But I think that he's guilty of more, yes, than he admitted to.
Right. I mean, he did promise that it was only 16. But was he around in any other areas other than Spokane where he might have, or Walla Walla where he might have killed people? I mean, other than out of the country.
Right. He was in Alabama for many years in a post. He was in Texas. He has been almost in almost every Army post that had anything to do with aviation because he was a helicopter pilot. And I think there's other cases that he could be linked to if they would go back and look through his time served and when he was at certain posts, because there's times where he would just go missing for a couple of days and there's no link to where he was at. And to me, it almost seems like it could be traced back. And even though he says he's telling all that he's done from a Christian perspective, I can't help but wonder if there's still not more.
Still not more, right.
And I don't know if he's afraid of being tried elsewhere out of the state of Washington or, but I definitely believe there's more in the U.S. alone.
Right, because he could be tried somewhere else where the death penalty, Texas or some of these other states
Correct.
Where he could be put to death. But he did have a kind of conversion after his arrest. He was arrested April 18th, 2000. But he, and a significant part of your book details his return. He had kind of bounced in and out of Christian influence, but his return to a life of faith. And can you talk about how that has affected him and your conversation with him?
Well, as a Christian myself, we've talked in great detail about it, but at one time he said he really made a pact with the devil, and that's when he was at his lowest. And I don't think until he was fully incarcerated and knew he wasn't getting out did he turn to that, which you hear a lot of that. In no way am I being judgmental. I think anything can happen for anyone, but I think he might not have had that conversion if he had not been imprisoned.
Right. Interesting. So it was while he was in prison, it gave him time to ruminate. But
right.
When he made a pact with the devil, was it something very conscious that he was he into that kind of more occultism? I didn't understand. I didn't see that in your book.
It's towards one of the last chapters when he's talking more in depth, word for word. And he said one night he woke up and he was laying in bed with his wife, and he started praying to Satan that if Satan would give him all the power on this earth to allow him to have total dominance over women, he would forever, be a follower of the devil. And at that time, he said he almost felt like, even though he had already committed murders and did awful things, that it was compounded. And he felt unstoppable. And that was his words, and I always found that intriguing, as some of the other ones I've talked with at that moment, they feel unstoppable. And that was the moment where he kind of climaxed with some of his kills getting closer together there in Washington State.
Right, and you had written in the book that he was a frequent purveyor of prostitutes and that he had killed, many of them month after month, but You had written that he had been with some of them multiple times, like 400 women over a short period of time. It seemed like 3 or 4 years. I mean, so he was very active, in that.
He was.
Yeah.
They were doing a lot of drugs together. He was doing a lot of cocaine and things, meth related, so to speed him up. And at that time, he said even some of the prostitutes he would get with, he might not have sex, but they would do sexual acts together, and then they would do the drugs and sleep for so many hours and then leave, and then he would come back to them. And with all of his experiences, I think he's put them all kind of together. And a very interesting point that he has told me since the book has been released, he's always had a very good relationship with the majority of his family. It's kind of falling apart right now, but his father is still alive. And he had always told his father that he had never went back and had sex with any of the corpses. And it has came out as of recent that they've proven that he did. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of been a little bit of a falling apart for him just in the last few months, because he had always said he wasn't a necrophiliac. And now it's been proven, and he's had to come clean that he did that. And I think that's been, his demise, not that he hadn't already had one, but I think now that he's lost some of his family over that, he'd always swore to them he had never
done that, right? So
that far.
So it wasn't an element of him being still being deceptive even after his arrest and conversion. Correct. Is that
yes. Yes.
And so he has what, like I forgot how big, like he has a 400. He's never getting out of jail. He's got a 400-year sentence or something like that, right?
Right. He was on death, but they commuted that at the end of 2018 to life, and without the possibility of parole. I think that was for all Washington State death cases.
Gotcha. And when you went through or communicated with him and went through his journals, the diaries, what other information did you come across of interest?
Well, he experienced something, I think, as a young child that was life-changing. I think he felt dominated, and at that time, I think his whole perspective on humans changed. There was a neighborhood boy, I think, if I recall correctly, he was 13, and Robert was around 10 at the time. And the young boy started trying to lure him over to an abandoned building in their neighborhood, and first let him in. It was like a grooming process, I think, that happened with Robert. And he ended up molesting Robert, and then it would progress, and he would defecate on Robert and try to make him be the total submissive. And I can't help but believe when he was telling this that there was a turning point, even at his young age, around 10, that changed his entire life at that time. And he said he was so humiliated he didn't reach out for help. He didn't tell his parents or a sibling or anything. And I think that changed him forever at that young age. It's not an excuse by any means, but I think that was a turning point for him.
I mean, you refer to him in the book as Tommy, this very negative impact, but very graphic fetish type events. If Yates is telling the truth, it's pretty, traumatizing to have to go through that with, while you're 10.
I agree. I think it did.
Well, anything else that you of note when you read through his notes or his diaries?
Well, I found it. I think he's honest to an extent. Like most killers, they're very arrogant and they want to brag on their good deeds and downplay their bad deeds. And I think even if released today, he would kill again. And I think genuinely with him coming across and trying to be honest, he would still kill again. And I think with some of his last sentences in his journal that he was talking to me about that he didn't want put in the book, I just get the gut feeling he couldn't control that urge. As much as he would want to do it, he couldn't. And I still think he has that need to dominate, and that's the scary part, that he would definitely kill again.
But it was kind of strange. He was almost like a Jekyll and Hyde character because he had
Very.
other relationships with women that were seemingly normal, and then these prostitutes or somehow became lesser or something, or able. I mean, and he always would shoot them. It was very disturbing, like very violent behavior towards his victims.
Right. It was almost like something just came over him, and at that moment he had to take their life, because a lot of the part that also rang true with me that he couldn't fight off his urges was he was taking his daughter to work, or he was picking up some of these prostitutes. She worked in a restaurant at a night waitressing job, and he would still be within a couple of blocks of his daughter's workplace, abducting these women and taking them back, or in the van assaulting them, and then still shooting them in the head, and still then could go pick up his daughter from work and go home like he had been this great father, helping his daughter along her, just her daily routine. And that was just shocking to me, how you could be trying to take care of your child and take a life all within the same night, and that was nothing to him to do that. It was just normal.
I mean, to all outward appearances, he was just kind of a normal father with children and job. And he had actually, I mean, one of the things that was scary about it is he had buried one of his victims underneath, or right next to where his master bedroom, right where he slept, and the police didn't find it until he confessed, right?
Right. Well, they ended up finding her, but he had actually, that victim, he had given his wife the jacket that she had wore from that victim. He had taken the jacket from the victim, gave it to his wife as a gift, and had buried her in the yard. And they didn't initially find her, but then, of course, when they basically ripped up the yard in the house, and they ended up finding her then.
Melody Murphy.
That was the only victim, yes, on his property.
What was the rationale about why he had to bury her on the property? It just
he's never said, but I thought it was strange that it was just her.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. It's typically because he would take them out into the woods, right? Or that was where he would put his victims?
Yes, sometimes he would. The first couple he killed was in the woods, but then the prostitutes, a lot of times he would kill them in his van, and then, of course, he was famously arrested in the white Corvette, which I thought was so odd, as intelligent as he is, to drive around in such a flashy vehicle, picking up prostitutes there towards the end. But I think it was how out of control he was on drugs, and not thinking as one time as methodical as he used to be. But yes, he would kill in some dump on the side of the road, or different places, yes. He didn't have a necessarily specific area.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you had said he had been commended so many times in the military that I think he had an 18-year career after working as a corrections officer, right?
Right, yes. Yes, he joined in 1977 and almost served 19 years in the military, and was a helicopter pilot, and he was extremely, extremely intelligent. And still at the end, I think his arrogance took over and dominated his intelligence, if that makes any sense. It took over.
He was he was less calculating there at the end. Was there anything or indicator about, why he wanted to have power over women? Was there anything you read in his past or anything about why he had that?
Not necessarily, because he always seemed to talk very highly of his mother, and most of the time you hear of an abused children that turn up or have hatred towards the female in their life. But he never talked of that, so I never did understand why he hated women. And then he had daughters, which is also shocking to me, to have a daughter. And then one of his youngest victims was just 16 years old, and that was one of his daughters was 16 years old. Mm-hmm. So he has never really said, or through all of his journals and diaries, has never really added up to me. He didn't have that hate towards someone.
Right. Are you still in contact with him?
Yes.
Yes. And what is his opinion of your completed book?
He really likes it. He told me he appreciated it, and that he thought that I would tell it in his words, and which I tried to do. And I also wanted to make sure I didn't exploit the victims or anything like that. That was the most important thing, and he knew that going in. And he seems pleased with it, actually.
And I mean, you kind of avoided getting into really graphic details about the kind of gory aspects of these cases. And there was another book, I think it was Mark Furman of O.J. Simpson infamy, wrote a book called Murder in Spokane.
Yes.
And do you know what Robert Yates' opinion of that book was?
He's not. I have read that one, and I'm familiar with it, but Robert never spoke directly concerning it. I think on this one he wanted to focus on him trying to be a better person, but like I said, he still admits he couldn't be that better person, and he would kill again if released. And he had asked me, but I'd already told him even if you wanted to go into graphic detail on this book, seeing as how it's kind of Christian-based, I'm not going to exploit the victims.
Right.
So that was kind of an agreement we both did on that. I wanted to kind of try to highlight that they were just good people that were in bad situations that got their lives took way too soon.
Yeah, and I think one of the points you made was that they were all got involved in drugs, and that's what made them vulnerable, was really this kind of plague of drugs led to, really unfortunate choices, which led them into the hands of a predator.
Right.
Right.
With the exception of the first two, though. The couple that was just out in the woods, they were both just outstanding students, starting college, doing all these wonderful things, and he just walked upon them and decided to take their lives. So they had never had any kind of negative drugs, any alcohol, nothing at all. They just were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Gotcha. And you read Furman's book. What was your opinion? Did you find it to be overly salacious or different? He never had any contact with Yates, correct?
I don't know if Mark has, or I don't know if he has or not, but I think the book was good. It was very salacious and in more gruesome detail than I wanted to do with that one. In my next book, it's going to be more detailed, but on Robert's, it just didn't seem like the right thing. It's
Gotcha.
This time to go into.
Well, tell me about what you're working on right now. What is your next book?
It's on Philip Jablonski. He's serving death row at San Quentin. And Jablonski caught my attention because he didn't have a certain victimology. If it was a man or a woman or a child, if he wanted to kill you at that time, he took your life. And he was very gruesome. He was a necrophiliac as well from time to time. He even, he told me he always had the need to taste a small part of each of his victims. If it was a female, it would be her nipple, or if it was a male, it was also in his private area. And he's just very gruesome. And he was also in the military and actually earned a Purple Heart. He was at the Fall of Saigon and all these different things, and he still was gruesome.
Do you believe that some of these experiences both Jablonski and Yates had in the military made them have a different attitude towards violence?
I don't think so with them. I think Jablonski, he did come from a horrible, horrible childhood. Abused by both mother and father, molested at a young age, and when he told his father he was molested, he was at age 6, and he was molested by a cousin who was babysitting him, his father beat him severely. And he told me at that point, at age 6, I thought, I will never tell the truth again to an adult. And that's kind of, I think all of his violence and anger came from his childhood. And then he wanted to be a policeman, and it was the 60s and the draft and all this was going on, and he had actually started community college because he thought if he could become a cop, he would learn how to cover up his tracks and not get arrested, because he still had he had already raped and things at this time, and he couldn't pull the grades in. So he decided to join the Army and served, I think he served around 4 years and came home, and then it was just horrible from that point on, because he's killed several people that they've never necessarily linked him to, that I truly believe he committed. So he
And,
is
I mean, he's not did he ever admit to any of his crimes before he was committed or convicted? Excuse me.
Oh, yes, he has. And I asked him when I interviewed him at San Quentin, I said, do you mind if I go forward with, there's 2 cold cases that he's committed that I've really tried to research and study on, and they're almost too detailed, in my opinion, to be made up. And he said, no, I don't mind you going forward. I'm already on death row. And he said, they're not going to retry me. He said, they're not going to spend the taxpayer dollars. They're not going to do it because these are 30-year-old murders. What else are they going to get from me? And he's right. He has nothing to lose at this point. So that's why I don't think he minds being forthcoming and open with what he's doing.
And when did you visit San Quentin to interview him?
I interviewed him last October at San Quentin, and we had a full contact visit, which was a little bit different because initially I was told he would be behind glass, and it didn't turn out to be that way. Since I flew in from out of state, they ended up giving us 5 hours together, so that was really good. I don't know if you've ever interviewed at San Quentin, but you're just in a small cage. It's not a cell; it's like a cage, and you can't take in pen or paper or anything like that. You can only take in your ID in a clear plastic baggie with some $1 bills. You can't take in anything else, no phone, no nothing. And it was an eye-opening experience, to say the least. But I'm really glad I was able to do it, and I'm hoping to be able to go back, hopefully, in the summer.
When do you think you'll publish this book?
Well, I'm working on it. I'm hoping for it to be completed by the end of this year.
Gotcha. And so, yes, for people who don't know, San Quentin is where all the death penalty cases used to go. I can't remember when. I think the death penalty here was in California was commuted in the early 70s, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
Well, I think they actually had an execution after that. Mm-hmm. But even though they have the death penalty, obviously they never use it, which I think is a shame. I'm pro-death penalty. If you're proven guilty, I think you should be executed. But I don't think that they're going to commute. He talked that he had got rumor from his lawyer that some of these death sentences, or all the death sentences, might be commuted to life without the possibility of parole. But I don't think that'll happen. But you never know.
Gotcha. And you've also been in contact with other murders and occult crimes. I have kind of an interest myself. I covered and was involved in researching the West Memphis 3, the occult murder of 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis. My book, Abomination, Devil Worship, and Deception. And I included in that book little segments about other occult-motivated killers, one being the Ripper Crew outside of Chicago. And you've been in contact with some members of the Ripper Crew. Is that correct?
Yes, I talk to Robin Geck and Edward Spotcher weekly. I've talked with them for at least 4 years now, too. And they're very interesting. I find Robin to be extremely intelligent. Edward, though, out of all the killers I've talked with, I think Edward is the only one that should be institutionalized instead of imprisoned. I genuinely think he has mental problems that should have been addressed years ago. And that's just my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely interesting.
When you're communicating, I mean, Robin Gecht has denied being involved in any murders from the time he was arrested to the present. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And
he tells me that he's innocent.
He still says he's innocent. So when you're talking to him, he still claims innocence. Does he ever, or have you inquired with him about his occult interests?
I have. We've discussed it, but when we initially started discussing his occult interest, he told me that he had never been into the dark imagery and the dark rituals and everything that they claimed that they had. But something very interesting I find with Robin is he mailed me some paperwork that he had filed with his lawyer several years back because there's severe police brutality, and even though he was beat, he never conceded. He still said his guilt, that he was innocent. He never said he was guilty.
And so even under duress and him being beat up, He hasn't. One of the Ripper crew was put to death. It's kind of odd because one of there were two brothers, Andrew and Thomas Corcoralis, but one was put to death and the other's about to be paroled, and that popped up.
I know that.
Yeah,
oh my word.
Yeah. So,
that's so crazy to me. I saw that as well.
Yeah, he has a tentative parole date sometime this year. So that's a very odd case, and they're responsible for at least 18 victims, women abducted, just horrible things, abuse to the body. And I think Robin Gecht was keeping body parts and things like that. So it was very graphic. But I think that I don't know where the testimony was about his occult interest, but I do believe that there were rituals, and there was a ritual kind of place where they had kind of an altar, correct?
Yes, Robin told me that that the police made accusations that upstairs in his home, in the attic, they had a small box where they had kept some of the women's breasts that had been removed during the murders, and the police accused the four of their crew members that they then would go up, pull out a satanic Bible, and do rituals around the remaining body parts. Mm-hmm. And he denies that and says, that my wife would have had smelled something. He was married at the time. His wife always said he was innocent, that he was home when these events took place. But they've said that they've used the body parts, specifically the breast, for rituals. Rituals,
and it was LaVey's Satanic Bible that they were using, right?
I'm sorry?
Was it Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible that they were using as an occult reference work?
Yes, it was the Satanic Bible, and he said that they said that they used piano wire to sever some of the breast where it would be a clean cut, that was supposedly important in the ritual for it to be a
clean, right,
even mutilation, as awful as that sounds.
Right. So those rituals were giving them power, and right. So, but they were working as kind of like contractors, right? That was kind of their front, and why they had a van and everything like that, correct?
Right, it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Robin did a lot of electrical work and did some sweet air, and they were basically just handyman.
Handyman, right.
And the other three were part of his crew. He was the boss.
He really was the boss, yeah. He was a little older than everybody, if I remember correctly.
He was, yes. But, it's said that he had worked with John Wayne Gacy, but he told me that is fictional as well, and that nobody's ever been able to prove that he ever worked for John Wayne Gacy, not in murdering people, but as in a regular job.
Right.
And he denies that he ever worked for Gacy, but that's been thrown out there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
I have,
or not,
yeah. I've heard that.
That's been thrown out for you. What do you think about that? Do you think he did?
I don't know, but I do believe that Gacy did not act alone. I think that he was actually involved with a group. Pardon me? Agreed?
Oh, I agree with you.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yes.
So I think that he was busted, but I think that he was actually a procurer of young boys and with his social contacts, and I think that was they just made him a lone serial killer. And I don't believe that was the case. So there was other people who got away. I don't think. I wouldn't be surprised if he had connections and had other people. And I think we know that Gacy did have people who worked for him, correct?
Yes, I think. For sure he had people that worked for him, yes.
Yeah. Who else have you, other than the Ripper crew, there were some names on your bio of people that you're also in contact with who I didn't know about. Can you talk about them?
Yes, I speak with Carl Drew out of Massachusetts, and Jose Reyes is my youngest killer that I talk with, and he was a satanic killer out of Texas. He's actually just 17 when he committed the crime. It was him and another fellow student who murdered their 15-year-old fellow student. And he had went and sold his soul to the devil, and this is what he said. And what they did to this young lady was just horrendous. And when they found her, she had a upside-down cross carved into her stomach. And it was gruesome, one of the most gruesome I'm even familiar with. It was terrible. And he is serving life in Abilene, Texas, and he's in total solitary confinement at the moment. He went in as such a young person, and I don't know the exact measure what took place that they had to put him in total solitary, but that's where he's at now, and he's supposed to be there at least for another year. And he's only like 20 years old right now, still very young.
Right. And that happened very recently. Happened in 2014, right? The murder occurred in 2014.
Yes,
right.
Yes. And he's just so young to have fallen this deep into something like this.
Do you know how he started his occult practices?
When he and I have been talking, he told me that he just came from a real difficult upbringing. He was in school, like not juvenile hall, but like a school, I can't even think, alternative school. And he didn't have much of a father in his life, and he got into drugs and selling drugs to make ends meet, got affiliated with the gang. Things still weren't going well for him. He said he got into dark music and got deeper and deeper into it. He thought it was like bringing him some sort of peace and some sort of comfort that he wasn't getting out of everyday life. And one night decided to sell his soul to the devil, just in those terms. And he told the other young man that committed the murder with him that he could also sell his soul to the devil if he chose to. But he had to help him murder the 15-year-old young girl. And that's basically what happened.
Gotcha. And
after a night of partying and drinking and drugs.
And so then Carl Drew, he was out of Massachusetts. He was also a Satanist who literally sacrificed people, right?
Yes. I guess out of everyone I've spoken with, Carl is the only one I've questioned his guilt or innocence. I can't help but wonder because he came from, I think he was a pimp, and I do think he was part of a prostitution ring. But I cannot help but believe the female that was involved with him was the actual, the ringleader. Her name was Robin Murphy, and she was actually paroled several years back, but had a parole violation and was reincarcerated. But I can't help but question Carl's guilt. I think he already had a rap sheet, and I think this was in the hysteria of all the satanics, everything on the news back in the 80s, and I think that he was desperate for a criminal, and he kind of fit the bill and was arrested. He may be completely guilty. I know there's good proof, but there's also a lot of questions.
But there was another woman. Yeah, there was another woman that he was with, right? That was also. Right. She was kind of a very troubled, kind of witch type figure, correct? If I remember correctly.
Well, yeah, that was Robin Murphy, and then they had Sharon Marsden, I think, that was killed that night was Robin's girlfriend. So they were lesbians, and it was part of the prostitution ring, and there was something to do with the girl who was killed wouldn't take her ring off. And it goes back to just something very freaky and very strange, and whoever was there that night, cut her finger off to obtain the ring, and then it was a sacrifice, and yes, terrible things.
Right, and I think Murphy, that he was using kind of strange chants or strange language, some type of occult language while he was committing the murder. Is that correct?
That's what I've been told, yes.
Gotcha.
And he still kind of denies being fully an occult member, but she said she is. So.
Right. And I've done a whole show on the Landing Report because, according to the FBI, there's no such thing as occult-motivated crimes, and all of the pedophilia associated with any occult group is really, the occultism is merely a cover for pedo rings. What's your opinion of the Landing Report?
Well, I disagree with it. I think there's a lot of drive for satanic killings. I do agree that the pedo rings are huge right now. I think human trafficking is horrible right now, but I think the satanic killers are still out there. I do think it's dropped from the late 70s to mid-90s. I think it kind of hit its peak in that 15 to 20 year span, but I definitely think it's motivated. I do think people, as in Robert, he prayed to the devil, if you give me power over these women. I do think it's a driving force, and I don't think a lot of times people want to accept it, whether it be police or just everyday people, because it's so scary.
Right.
I mean, the killer's bad enough, but dealing with the occult and demons and hell is taking it to another level. And I think their finding is false, but who am I to say that? I think it's very prevalent in today's society, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you also, one other group that you had contact with was the Vampire Clan out of Kentucky, right? Well, I can't remember the guy's name.
Roderick Farrell.
Roderick Farrell, yes.
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 I have. He didn't really go into a lot of detail, but he actually came out of Murray, Kentucky, which isn't all that far from where I'm at either. And I think his mother brought him into it, though, very early on, and I think he had a very twisted relationship with his mother. I think she was almost sexually attracted to him from my research, and I think, she found a carved pentagram, I know, in his room at one time, and to question him about it, she loved it, and he believed in drinking blood made you immortal, like
Right.
you do see on televisions and movies,
Yeah, he called himself a vampire, like some kind. He really thought he was a vampire, and I think the mother was arrested for a relationship with one of his friends, if I remember correctly, because I researched that.
She was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
she was
I
strange.
think the teenager was just 14 at the time that she was arrested for the relationship with.
Yeah. So, and he took on, I think Roderick Farrell took on the name of a demon from the Goetia, Visago or Visago was kind of his cult name. And there's actually video of some of the other clan members out at night drinking each other's blood, cutting each other, eating rare meat, like very unsavory practices. So there still was something very dark about him. And I think he admitted, Roderick did, that eventually he was going to kill somebody. And they ended up traveling, I think, to Florida and killing one of the clan's mom and dad, or he did.
They did.
Yeah. So.
Yes, that was his girlfriend, I think at the time, her parents.
Right.
And I'm not sure if you researched it, but the friend that was also in there with Roderick at the time said just this look of pure evil came over him as he was about to kill her father.
Yeah.
And he said it was almost like he transformed right there. And I do believe that evil can possess people and take them over. And I do think his being a vampire or truly believing he was a vampire took over his entire existence.
Yeah, I think so. I think he came out of a fantasy. There was some kind of role-playing game they used to play, and then it just became real in their minds. It flipped. And, it was very... And I think he got the death penalty, and that was commuted, so he's very fortunate. And he was also like many other satanic killers where they mock the police and they mock the media. So there's all these... Like Ricky Casso, I think out of Massachusetts or somewhere like Connecticut, was the same thing where they're just gloating and making strange faces and rambling on like they're possessed. It was really crazy.
Yes. I think they thrived on that, and they loved that dark imagery, and they wanted to become that. So if they could see themselves on television mocking the people and looking like this pure evil creature, it gave them a high.
Gives them a high. And the Damien Eccles of the West Memphis Three blowing kisses to the families and really strange, flipping people off while he's being, on trial for murder. It's incredible. Yeah. So these guys all share kind of somewhat similar traits.
Yes, I agree.
Well, we're at 45 minutes. It's gone very fast. You have a very active Twitter page, correct?
Yes.
And how can people see your posts and stuff like that? What is it? Murder Journals?
It is, yes. It's Murder Journals, and then it's at Minnie Alford 16.
Gotcha. MINNIEALFORD 16. And the title of the book that we kind of opened the show was Robert Yates, From Darkness to Light, published last year, March 29th. I highly recommend that book. And you're going to publish another book on Philip Jablonski, hopefully by the end of this year. Is there anything else that the listeners should know or you want to cover?
Well, I just appreciate this opportunity. I'm thankful to get the word out there, and I do like drawing attention to this, and hopefully everybody knows that the true passion, I hope, behind people like what you and I do is to get victims closure and bring awareness to people, and that there is darkness out there, but there is a greater light, and that's my main goal. Amen.
Amen to that. Awesome. Again, Minnie Alford, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful evening.
You as well. Okay, we're done. I'm just going to stop the recording.